A prepared position on open ground is a toll gate. It does not stop an army, it sets the price of passage, and it collects that price in the men and machines the attacker must expose to cross it. At Rorke's Drift in 1879, roughly 150 British soldiers held a mission station against several thousand Zulu warriors, not because they were braver than the men who charged them, but because a wall of mealie bags and biscuit boxes forced every charge into a narrow front where a handful of rifles could cover the whole approach. The wall did not fight. It arranged the fight so that numbers arrived a few at a time, into fire that was ready for them. On the Pokrovsk axis in Donetsk region, 12 Ukrainian infantry and a two-man FPV drone crew held a shattered tree line on the same principle, and they held it for 9 hours against a reinforced Russian assault company that outnumbered them many times over. The ground decided the shape of everything that happened on it. The tree line was a shelter belt, a strip of planted trees, perhaps 280 meters long, running north to south across a farm road on the Pokrovsk axis. Years of shelling had stripped it to broken trunks and low, tangled brush, but the earth beneath it still held the old drainage ditch and the raised bank that farmers had built decades earlier, and that bank was cover. On both sides of the tree line lay open fields, plowed black earth that ran flat for the better part of a kilometer in every direction. To the east, the direction the Russians would come from, 2 more shelter belts ran parallel to this one, 400 and 700 meters out, and between them was nothing but the open ground a man has to cross on his feet. 12 soldiers held the belt. That was the entire garrison, spread along the bank in 8 fighting positions. Some doubled, some single dug deep enough that a man could stand in them below ground level and roofed at the back with logs and earth against airburst. 2 PKM machine guns anchored the flanks, one at the northern end of the belt and one at the southern, sighted so their fire crossed the road and the open ground in front of it. An AGS-17 automatic grenade launcher covered the dead ground behind a fold in the field to the northeast, the one patch the machine guns could not reach. In a position near the center, a 2-man crew kept a Stugna P anti-tank system, its optics trained down the axis of the road. Everything was laid so that a man crossing the open ground would be under at least 2 weapons at once, wherever he stepped. Nothing about the fields in front was left unmeasured. The crews had walked the ground in the days before and marked reference points on it. A burned MTLB hull at 600 meters, a lone concrete pylon at 400, the near edge of the eastern shelter belt at 700. A wounded tree stump on the road itself marked 200 meters, and every soldier in the belt knew that when a Russian reached that stump he was inside the range where a rifle does not miss. Anti-tank mines sat in the roadway where it entered the open ground, spaced so that a driver swerving off one would find another. Behind the belt, 4 kilometers back, an 82mm mortar and a 120mm mortar had the fields pre-registered, their firing data written down for each marked point so that a call for fire meant a grid already logged, not a correction worked out under pressure. The 13th and 14th men were not in the tree line at all. 300 meters behind it, in a covered dugout with a screen and a stack of drones, sat the FPV crew, a pilot and his partner who changed batteries, swapped warheads, and watched the sky. They had roughly 40 first-person view drones staged in the hole with them, most carrying anti-tank shaped charges, a few with fragmentation warheads for infantry in the open. 40 drones sounds like plenty. Against a reinforced company with vehicles, it is a supply that has to be spent with discipline, 1 target at a time, and the crew knew it. How long 40 drones would last was the question the whole day turned on, and we will come back to it. What was coming toward them was a reinforced Russian assault company, something close to 100 men reinforced with armor, staged in and behind the eastern shelter belts. Intercepted chatter that morning put the assault element near 90 dismounts with vehicles in support. The road mattered to them for a simple reason. It was the graded route into a town to the west, a town that still held civilians, and the fields on either side turned to axle-deep mud in the wet and to open glass under drone observation in the dry. To move armor and supply toward that town, the Russians needed the road, and to have the road they needed the tree line that a dozen Ukrainians were sitting in. Their plan asked mass to do the work. Push enough men and vehicles at a position held by 12. And the 12 are overrun by weight alone. It is an assumption that has worked for the Russian army in other places. and it was about to be tested against ground that had been arranged to break it. Assault 1 came at 0615, in the gray light before full dawn. It was a mechanized push straight down the road, 2 BMP-2s and an MTLB carrying dismounts, the vehicles moving fast to close the open ground before the defenders could range them. The lead BMP-2 was doing perhaps 30 kilometers an hour when it reached the mines where the road entered the fields. The blast tore the track off and slewed the hull sideways across the road, and the vehicle stopped there broadside, blocking the graded surface for everything behind it. That was the first thing the ground took. It turned the road, the Russians' only good surface, into an obstacle of their own making. The dismounts did what training tells them to do when a vehicle is hit. They came out of the back fast and went flat in the field. The second BMP-2 pushed left to go around the wreck and put itself broadside to the tree line at 320 meters, and the Stugna crew was already waiting. The missile hit it low on the flank and the vehicle brewed up, a column of black smoke climbing straight in the still morning air. Now there were 2 burning hulls on the road and 30 Russian soldiers in the open field behind them, and the machine guns opened from both ends of the belt at once. The infantry was caught in exactly the place the position was built to catch them, in the open between the marked pylon at 400 meters and the stump at 200, under interlocking fire from 2 PKMs with a grenade launcher searching the fold behind them. The first bursts put several down before the rest understood where the fire was coming from. Men who went prone in the plowed furrows found the furrows were only a foot deep and did not hide them from a gun firing across the rows. The MTLB reversed hard, trying to pull survivors back toward the eastern belt, and the FPV pilot took his first shot of the day, putting a drone through its open troop hatch as it backed away. The vehicle rolled to a stop and did not move again. The mortar call went out as the assault started to break. The 120 mm rounds fell on the near edge of the eastern shelter belt where the survivors were trying to rally, the grid already logged. The first rounds landing inside 4 minutes. Assault 1 was over in about 11 minutes. 2 BMP-2s destroyed, 1 MTLB destroyed, and of the 30-odd dismounts, fewer than half made it back to the eastern belt. The tree line had not lost a man. 1 PKM had cooked its barrel and been swapped, and the crew went back to watching the field. For 40 minutes the field was quiet. The wrecks burned themselves out on the road, and the smoke drifted north across the fields and thinned. In the tree line, the soldiers moved between positions in the ditch, redistributing machine gun belts, drinking water, saying little. The FPV crew had spent 1 drone and accounted for a vehicle with it, and 39 remained in the hole. Behind them, the mortar crews logged the corrected fall of their rounds and waited. The quiet was not rest. It was the interval a company commander needs to reorganize soldiers who have just learned that the direct approach does not work. Assault 2 began near 0800, and it was a different idea. No vehicles this time. The company commander sent dismounted infantry north, out of the eastern shelter belt, and along a shallow depression that ran toward the northern end of the Ukrainian belt, hoping the fold in the ground would hide the approach from the machine guns and let the infantry close to grenade range. It was a sound plan against a position that could not see the depression, but the FPV crew could see everything the tree line could not. The pilot put a drone up and walked it out along the depression at 100 meters of altitude, looking down into the fold, and there they were. A file of perhaps 20 men moving in a low crouch through ground they believed was dead. The first drone came down into the middle of the file, and the fragmentation warhead did its work in the open. The infantry scattered out of the depression, and scattering meant climbing into the open field where the northern PKM was waiting. What had been a concealed approach became 24 men exposed at 300 meters. The gun worked them from the flank while the pilot's partner readied the next drone. Assault 2 never reached grenade range. The survivors pulled back into the depression and crawled east, and the attempt cost the company perhaps a dozen more men for nothing gained. By mid-morning, the arithmetic in the tree line was starting to shift in a way numbers alone do not show. The garrison had not lost a soldier, but it had spent ammunition. And ammunition was the one thing 12 men in a hole could not make more of. 2 of the 8 positions were down to their last belts. For the PK, the Stugna had 4 missiles left. Across the open ground behind the belt, the ground the resupply would have to cross, a Russian reconnaissance drone hung in the sky, and everyone in the position understood what that meant. Nothing on wheels or on foot would cross that field in daylight and live. Whatever the 12 had with them was what they would fight the rest of the day with. Assault 3 came at 0945, and it came from the south. The flank the first assault had not touched. This was the commander's heaviest effort yet. 3 BMP-2s and a pair of MTLBs moving across the open ground from the southern shelter belt in a rough line, all of them carrying dismounts, all of them trying to reach the belt in a single rush before the defenders could deal with them one at a time. It was the right instinct. The way to beat a position that kills targets one at a time is to give it more targets than it can service at once. The southern PKM opened first. Then the Stugna crew shifted to their secondary firing port and took the nearest BMP-2 at 400 meters. The mines did not help here. There were none in the open field to the south, so the vehicles kept coming while the tree line burned time it did not have engaging them. The FPV crew went to work at a rate they had not used yet, sending drone after drone across the field, one to a vehicle. The first hit a BMP-2 in the flank and stopped it. The second missed, going wide and into the dirt, and the pilot's partner already had the next in his hands. The third caught an MTLB and set it burning. 3 vehicles were down in under 6 minutes, and the Stugna took a fourth as it tried to turn back. But the last MTLB reached a fold 250 meters out and dropped its dismounts into cover before it was hit. And for the first time in the day, a Russian squad was inside 200 meters of the tree line, in ground the machine guns could not fully reach. 10 men, maybe 12, in the dead angle behind the fold. The FPV crew had spent 9 drones in 6 minutes. 30 were left, and the hardest part of the day had not started yet. The squad in the fold was a problem the position had been built to prevent, and had not quite prevented. From the fold, a man could crawl the last 200 meters through the shallow furrows and reach grenade range of the southern positions, and there were enough of them to try it in a rush. The AGS-17 was the answer. The grenade launcher could drop its rounds behind the fold where flat trajectory fire could not go, and the gunner walked a burst of grenades along the reverse slope, searching the dead ground by feel and by the pilot's corrections from above. The FPV crew put 2 fragmentation drones into the same patch. The rush that the squad was gathering itself for never came. What was left of it went to ground and stayed there, pinned, neither able to advance nor to withdraw across the open ground behind. The rhythm the FPV crew had settled into was the quiet engine of the whole defense. A drone went up, found its target, and came down onto it in 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And while it flew, the partner already had the next airframe on the rail with a fresh battery and the warhead armed. Wind was the enemy of that rhythm, and the afternoon breeze had picked up out of the west, pushing the small drones and forcing the pilot to fight the last 30 meters onto each target. Every airframe he spent fighting the wind was one he could not spend later, and later was coming. Near noon, the Russians changed the tool. For 20 minutes, the tree line took artillery, 122 mm rounds walking up and down the belt. The heaviest fire the position had absorbed all day. This was the part the roofs over the fighting positions had been built for. The soldiers went deep into their holes and waited it out while the shelling stripped what was left of the trees to splinters and filled the air with the smell of burnt earth and cordite. 2 positions took near hits that collapsed the front lip and half buried the men inside, and they dug themselves out and kept their weapons. 1 soldier at the northern PKM took shrapnel across the shoulder and back. His partner dragged him into the ditch, packed the wounds, and took over the gun. The garrison was 12 still, but one of the 12 could no longer fully fight. The infantry came in behind the barrage, the way infantry is supposed to, time to reach the belt while the defenders were still down in their holes. Assault 4 was a 2-pronged push, 1 group straight down the road across the burning wrecks, another from the southern fold where the Pin squad was still waiting and now had support. For a few minutes it was closer than it had been all day. The road group reached the far edge of the mines, picking through on foot between the wrecks, and the southern group rose out of the fold and rushed the tree line. The position answered with everything at once. Both PKMs, the wounded man's gun back in action under his partner, the AGS dropping grenades on the fold, the riflemen up on the bank the moment the shelling lifted because they had learned to read the gap between the last round and the first attacker. The FPV pilot took the lead man of the road group at 60 meters, closer than he had shot all day, and the drone and the target went off together in the wrecked timber. The southern rush made it to within 80 meters of the belt before it broke, the nearest Russian falling in the furrows within shouting distance of the men he was trying to reach. Assault 4 was the high water mark. It was also, though no one in the tree line knew it yet, the beginning of the end for the company. By early afternoon, the field in front of the tree line had become a record of the day written in wreckage. 7 armored vehicles stood burned or broken across the approaches, on the road. In the southern field, out toward the eastern belt, the Russian assault company that had started the morning near 100 men had spent more than half of its strength on a strip of broken trees 280 meters long, and had not put a single soldier into the Ukrainian positions. The road was still closed. The town to the west was still, for one more day, out of reach of the men who wanted it. Inside the tree line, the cost was different but real. The wounded man at the northern gun was stable but fading, and there was no way to evacuate him across the open field, with the Russian drones still overhead. The Stugna was down to its last missile. Of the 40 FPV drones that had started the day in the dugout, remember, 14 remained, and the crew had stopped taking any shot that was not certain. The 120mm mortar behind the belt had fired most of its ready rounds. 12 men were holding, but they were holding on the far edge of what they had, and the afternoon was not over. Intercepted chatter through the early afternoon carried the tone of a company being pushed by someone who was not on the ground. The order to take the road had not changed, and the men being told to cross the field had by now seen what crossing it cost. A position that breaks the enemy's plan also breaks his willingness, and the tree line had been doing both since dawn. Assault 5 came near 2 in the afternoon, and it was the most patient attempt of the day. The company commander finally stopped feeding men into the front of the position and tried to go around it. A platoon-sized group worked far to the north, well beyond the northern PKMs' reach, trying to swing wide across the open fields and come at the tree line from behind, where the fighting positions were roofed against the front and open at the rear. If they reached the back of the belt, the whole geometry of the day would invert, and the 12 would be the ones caught in the open. It was a good idea that depended on not being seen. And the one thing the position had that the Russians could not strip away was eyes above the field. The FPV crew caught the flanking group at 800 meters, strung out across open plow with no cover for a kilometer in any direction. The pilot did not hurry. He took the lead element first to stall the movement, then the tail to freeze the rest in place, and then he and his partner worked the middle at the pace their remaining drones allowed. The mortar dropped its last rounds among them. There was nowhere on that open ground for a pinned platoon to go, and after 20 minutes of it, the group broke and streamed back north and east, and the flanking attempt was finished. The crew was down to 7 drones. That was the moment the day hung in the balance, though it did not look dramatic from outside. The tree line had beaten 5 assaults and inverted a flanking move, and it had almost nothing left to do it again. 7 FPV drones, 1 Stugna missile. The PKMs down to a few hundred rounds between them. A wounded man in the ditch. No resupply possible while the light held and the Russian drone watched the ground behind. If the company put in one more coordinated push with what it had left, the arithmetic that had protected the 12 all day would finally run the other way. The last assault came in the failing light near 6 in the evening, and it was not the disciplined thing the morning attacks had been. The company had been bled past the point where it could coordinate vehicles and infantry and timing, and what came was a ragged push of dismounts down the familiar ground, the road and the southern fold. The 2 approaches the day had already proven were killing ground. Perhaps 30 men, the reorganized remnant of everything that had not yet crossed the field, coming because someone behind them had ordered the road taken before dark. The tree line met it the way it had met all the others, but slower now, more carefully, every burst counted. The southern PKM fired in short bites to save the belt. The FPV pilot spent his drones one at a time on the men who came closest, 60 meters, 50. The warheads going off in the broken timber at the edge of the position. The Stugna crew held their last missile for a vehicle that never came. The riflemen on the bank did the close work. The attack came apart the way a thing comes apart when the men in it no longer believe it will succeed. First a hesitation, then a few men going to ground, then the whole push sliding backward into the dusk toward the eastern belt, leaving its nearest men in the furrows 100 meters short of the trees. By the time it was fully dark, the field was silent except for the last of the wrecks ticking as they cooled. The Russian company did not come again. It had put something over 100 men and a column of armor at a tree line held by 12, across 9 hours and 6 assaults, and at the end of it the 12 were still in their holes and the road was still closed. The company had lost most of its strength and all of the vehicles that tried the approach, and it pulled back east under the cover of night to a start line it had left that morning, believing the position would fall by noon. When the tally was set against the ground, it made the shape of the day plain. On the field lay the better part of a reinforced assault company and the vehicles it had committed, 3 BMP-2s, 3 MTLBs, and a scattering of infantry across every approach the tree line covered. The Ukrainian garrison had lost no one and had one man wounded, the gunner at the northern PKM, who was carried out across the fields that night once the Russian drone finally went home, and the ground behind the belt was dark enough to cross. The FPV crew ended the day with 3 drones, left of the 40 they had started with. They had used the other 37 to take apart an assault company one target at a time, which was the question the whole day had turned on, and now it was answered. 12 infantry and 2 drone pilots did not hold that tree line because a strip of broken trees was stronger than a battalion's worth of intent. They held it because they had measured the ground and armed it and refused to move from it. And because every soldier who crossed the open field crossed it into fire that had been waiting for him since before the sun came up. The wall at Rourke's Drift did not fight, and neither did the tree line. It only arranged the fight, and the men who built it did the rest. On the Pokrovsk axis, that is how a road stays closed, not with numbers, but with a dozen people who know exactly what their ground can do, and who hold it until the other side runs out of men to send.